Well, one of the things that we continue to hear is the talk about solutions as opposed to the problem, and I couldn't agree more. I have to disagree somewhat, Mr. Caruso, with your comment that if we do nothing, then people will move and the groundwater will drop. That doesn't equate. If people move and they don't use water, how can it drop? So, but having said that, I've worked with the prior group, which was the ranchers, to try to pull together an arrangement there to understand the differences between ag use and urban use when I was the mayor of Paso Robles. It took a long time to get that agreement put together, but we did that. And I was involved in Nacimiento from day one. And the Nacimiento project, and I've heard mentioned, why don't these folks take the additional water? There's simply one answer to that question. It's called money. However, one of the things that Mr. Ogren and I have talked a lot about is I'm going to do everything I can to encourage those that are the purveyors of the Nacimiento Water Project to go ahead and contractually subscribe to the full amount. That is, if you don't, I think 20 years down the line, they're going to be sorry that they didn't go ahead and subscribe to that water. And I think that they should go ahead and do that. They shouldn't have to pay any more for it because they're already paying for the pipeline. So they should secure that water, because these communities, every one of them, are going to need that at some point down the line. There's a lot of talk about the Margarita. Couldn't agree more. But in order to put those gates back in, you're talking about a $30 to $40 million retrofit project. And right now, I think the city of San Luis Obispo would be the one on the hook for that. I think that if we had interagency and political will to do this, we could probably make that happen. And I think that we are so close, and I've mentioned this before, topographically, geographically, and logistically, I think that we are so close to being able to wheel water where we need to have that water. So I think that we could get there. I still don't understand why we couldn't put bladder dams in certain areas. They did that in Monterey County to be able to provide water in the Castro Valley area. We should be able to do that in the Salinas River in a couple of intervals to be able to help charge that basin. There could be water exchanges out of the Santa Margarita Lake. Talked about this before as well. San Luis Obispo could take whatever water they're taking from Santa Margarita Lake out of Nacimiento. It's not going to cost them any more, and release whatever that is back down the Salinas River. I don't know from a hydraulic standpoint how much that would help, but I think that that's one opportunity to take into consideration. A question that I have, though, Paavo, maybe you can help me out here. We continue to hear the debate between rural and agriculture and how we're going to be able to come together. Last Friday at this meeting, the tour that we took, I talked to a young engineer from over in Fresno County. And when he came over, he's a pretty interesting young man, but he said, I was very surprised to see that in your county you have no water districts. And I'm curious to know, what does that mean? What does a water district, what is it comprised of? How is it established? What is its intended purpose? Maybe you could help me with that.
Certainly. Paavo, Ogren, your Public Works Director. In terms of over in the valley, there are a number of irrigation districts, and that's what he's specifically speaking to. And the irrigation districts themselves are essentially the governing bodies of the irrigation districts are the agricultural operations, the landowners of those agricultural areas. It's very common for those irrigation districts to be the entities that are purchasing supplemental water. They date back decades. Many of them purchase Central Valley Project water, which is water that's being developed as part of the federal government's program dating back to the Depression. Some of those irrigation districts are buying State Water Project water that's been delivered since the 1960s. And then the acquisition of that water by those ag irrigation districts, and then those districts determine how they're going to pay for it amongst the agricultural entities and how they're going to share in the water supplies. And some of the districts have also already gotten into groundwater banking, and essentially how do they most efficiently manage the supply that they have amongst the agricultural entities. They require special legislation. You know, in contrast, the water districts that we operate at the county service areas, and we used to operate waterworks districts, are generally authorized underneath state statutes to be created by your board and may require LAFCO's approval. But the ag irrigation districts, anyone that's proposed, needs to go through a special legislative process. The bottom line is that that is a form of governance that's essentially controlled by the property owners, and so that they can best manage the resource that they're utilizing, whether it's a local resource or whether or not it's a supplemental source that they've acquired, including the powers to establish assessments and figure out how to pay for it. One of the misnomers that I've heard recently is that we don't have any water districts, and of course the San Luis Obispo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District, which is underneath the authority of your Board of Supervisors, is countywide, and there are things that we can do through the formation of zones of benefits in order to accomplish some of these strategies. But again, I do believe that ag irrigation districts have a real possibility of being a future in this county, especially in North County. Today we've heard comments about the concerns about government action, and ag irrigation districts have been a form where the agricultural operations can, in some respect, control their own destiny and manage the resource.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Right, and may I just follow up on that, Supervisor Mecham? That has been one of the potential solutions in answering the question, how do we pay for any of these measures that are implemented? And that certainly is one possibility. You define the area of benefit, and then of course people within that would have to determine how to pay for that, but it would be controlled by that area or district, that zone of benefit.
Yeah, and I think it's important for people to recognize that the flood control district, in addition to spending about $500,000 approximately over the last 10 years in evaluating the situation, which really comes out of general property taxes collected countywide, is a wholesaler of a supply. The flood control district through Nacimiento, State Water, Lopez, ultimately sells water that's provided to all the residents and all the businesses in all 7 cities within this county. Paso's got a little bit of work to do on the treatment plant before they get delivery. That question came up, but they're well on their way. And more than that number of the unincorporated areas also are provided. And the missing issue that we have in some respects right now is that there are no agricultural entities out there, to participate in these types of projects. And so, part of it is good governance, making sure that you share responsibilities and share decision making. But the San Joaquin Valley and the farming interests over there have been challenged with these problems, in many decades prior to here, and so they've developed solutions that it's a combination of governance as well as financing in order to implement some of the things that we know are available or are going to be expensive and are going to no doubt take some time to develop.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
And I think too, responding to the question about Shandon going to be taking state water. Shandon had a 100-acre appropriation from state water, and they had leased that out. We have now secured that back for Shandon, and from what I understand, talking to Mr. Ogren, we are going to be putting that turnout, tying that in. They will take a 100-acre view of water. Now that's not going to resolve the issue we have with the entire water basin. And I guess the other issue that I have is with, this watershed. I've heard this time and again. Some people will say, well, if we get a good snow melt or the glaciers melt, then this doesn't happen. This watershed is one of the largest in the western United States, and the rainfall is what dictates what we get in our water basin. And by this ordinance, though, I have a little bit of a problem with this ordinance from 2 standpoints. Number one, if you are a rural resident living next door to an agricultural entity, this is not going to help you. This ordinance will do nothing to help you. What I think we need are much larger issues or solutions out there to this problem. But my biggest concern is that all the work that's been put into sitting down at the table, because I can tell you, talking to the chairman of this is like herding cats. Once you've got everybody at the table to start talking about potential solutions, that is a major step. And if we lose that, we're going to be talking to more lawyers than I care to talk to. I think that that's where this will head. And nobody wants to talk about adjudication. Nobody wants to get to that link. And I don't either. So I think that these folks have they've made some pretty good strides, and I'd like to see them continue to work with this. But we need to work on larger solutions to this problem than simply this.
Okay.